Hello everyone and welcome back to our bizarre and unusual world. Today I'm going to be talking about a very interesting murder case, and that is the case of Angela Samota. For this series I always share the who, what, when, where, why, and how of the topic at hand. So let's start out with the when and where for this case. So this case starts in October of 1984 in Dallas, Texas within the United States. Now on to the who. Who exactly is this case about? And that is of course Angela Samota. So Angela, or Angie to her friends, she was born September 19th, 1964. And she was from Alameda, California. Friends and loved ones described Angela as smart and very vibrant. She had a great personality and was kind of considered like a triple threat with brains, beauty, and personality. Now, she was going to school at Southern Methodist in Texas. She was studying science and engineering, and for 1984, this was very much a male-dominated subject, so she was one of very few women in these particular studies. While at school, she joined a sorority, she made great friends, and was just noted overall as a really great person. So what happened to Angela? On Friday, October 12th, 1984, Angela and a few of her friends went to the Texas State Fair. They were making a whole day of fun out of it, and after going to the fair, they actually went to a dance club called the Rio Room, where they were just having dancing and fun and a really great night. Now, Angela's boyfriend did not go with them. He actually had an early morning job, so he couldn't stay up late, so he stayed behind and she just went out with her friends. That night, after taking her friends home, she did stop by her boyfriend's apartment at about 1 a.m. to basically tell him goodnight and that she was done with her evening, and then she went on to her apartment. Now, not long after Angela left his apartment, her boyfriend received a phone call, and some reports say that Angela actually spoke to him, saying something like, "Please talk to me," before the line cut off, and other reports say that she didn't speak at all. The line just basically went dead. Either way, her boyfriend was very concerned that something was wrong, so he actually headed over to her apartment. He couldn't get inside. No one was answering when he knocked on the door. The door was locked, so that was when he called the police. The police arrived and they were let inside of Angela's apartment by the apartment manager. And unfortunately, what they found was an absolute tragedy. Angela was found dead in her bedroom. She had been raped, she had broken bones, and she had been stabbed 18 times. The reports say that there was a lot of blood throughout the room and that it was a very horrific sight to walk into. Now, there was DNA found at the scene of the crime. There was blood, semen, and a fingernail found. But this is 1984, so DNA testing was nothing like it is today, so they couldn't really do much with the DNA that was found at the scene. Now, police did have some suspects that they started looking into. The current boyfriend, they started looking into him as a suspect because he was the last person to see Angela alive, but he was actually ruled out as a suspect. There was talk of an ex-boyfriend who had been very controlling and even like abusive towards her that they kind of looked into, but nothing came of that either. Then there was Russell Buchanan. Now, police really focused in on him, and Russell was actually one of the friends that Angela had been to the fair and out dancing with that night. They focused in on him for really no reason. They had no evidence against this poor guy, and it didn't go anywhere. People described Russell as kind of like a shy type, and some people suggested that he had a crush on Angela. So investigators really went in hard with the idea that he had made a move at Angela and she had rejected him, and so in turn he had killed her. But like I said, there was no evidence to support this. Russell Buchanan was very cooperative throughout the investigation. He went in for multiple questioning, and he even went in for a lie detector test. But still, nothing came of it. There was no evidence, but that's all they could focus on. So eventually he lawyered up and was done with it, which I can totally understand. He was being very cooperative and there was nothing. He didn't do anything, and that's all that they were focused on at that time. So because none of their ideas were really panning out, the summer of 1985, the case started to go cold. So why and how was this case solved? And this is a very interesting part to this case. The reason that this case was solved was because of one of Angela's friends named Sheila Wazowski. So when Angela was in school, she met Sheila. These two girls were very different. You could kind of say extrovert versus introvert sort of situation. But they were roommates, and after spending some time together, they became close. They grew up in very similar families. Both women didn't grow up with fathers in their lives, and they kind of bonded over similar circumstances. Now, Sheila had been out of town that weekend that Angela was murdered, so she actually found out when one of Angela's sorority sisters gave her a phone call, and she found out that one of her dear friends had been murdered. Just devastating news. Angela's death greatly affected Sheila. She dropped out of school. After that, she didn't want to go back. She felt like the world was terrifying. She didn't know who to trust. There was no concrete suspect for this. Was it someone she knew? Was it one of their friends? What had happened to her best friend? She had no idea, and she just didn't trust the world at that point. Sheila did, however, want to help with as much as she could with the investigation. She went in for questioning, she answered questions about what she knew about Angela, anything she could do to help. At one point, the police actually had her go out to dinner with Russell Buchanan again, because they were so set that it was him, and she wore a wire, and she was trying to ask questions about Angela to get him to slip up on something, but all of his answers were the same answers he gave the police. His story never changed, it wasn't him. They got nothing from it, but she was willing to do anything she could to try and solve her friend's murder case. So over the years, Sheila and the main detective on the case kept in touch. They would talk about the case or new things or how they could maybe solve it. I mean, they talked so much that he actually attended Sheila's wedding. The first burst of an idea from Sheila came in 1994, so that's 10 years after Angela was murdered. She was actually watching the O.J. Simpson trial, a very popular trial, as we all know, and they started talking about DNA evidence. She remembered hearing about DNA evidence in some of her classes at school, and she knew that there had been DNA evidence at Angela's apartment. So she immediately wanted the investigation to look further into that now that the technology had moved up in the last 10 years. The next kind of big moment for Sheila was a quiet night at home. She was actually reading some passages from her Bible, and she kind of had an experience that jolted her into a specific direction. So she's quoted as saying, "I thought, am I dreaming? Am I asleep? What is it? There was no talking. It was just her and her great smile. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I have a lot of faith, and I believe there are messages. And in that moment, I thought, it's time." So in that moment, the dream, whatever it was, Sheila saw her friend come to her, and it really kind of kicked her into gear on she was going to help solve this case. She immediately got up and started calling the Dallas Police Department, and she called, and she left messages, and she called, and she called, and she called, and she kept bugging them over and over again, wanting answers on how the investigation was being handled, that they needed to reopen it, that they needed to do this and this, and she just kept going. I mean, she was annoying them, and they started making up lies that they had lost some of the reports or the evidence on her case just to try and get her to stop. There's even some reports that say someone told her that some cases just aren't meant to be solved. You really tell someone that? Really? Really, you gonna tell somebody that? But Sheila did not take that answer. She actually moved forward and became a licensed private investigator in 2005. She hoped that these steps would gain her access to some of the files relating to Angela's case, and that she could be taken more seriously within police departments or any sort of investigating circles. And it was still difficult. It wasn't like an immediately grasp for her to be in those circles, but she was trying her very best to do what she could to help solve her friend's case. Now, with all of her persistence, they finally decided to reopen the case in 2006. They gave it to a new investigator. Her name was Linda Crum. Now, the main evidence had been that DNA evidence. So when they reopened the case, that's what they wanted to retest or start that process. But the backlog of DNA evidence was so extreme, it took them 2 years to get a result or answers on the DNA that was found at Angela's apartment. 2 years. That's insane. And when they got those results, it was kind of a shock to Sheila because they didn't match any of the suspects police had originally thought, including Russell Buchanan. And Sheila had kind of thought that he could have been responsible for her friend's death, but it wasn't his DNA. So the new investigator, Linda Crum, decided to try a different angle now that they could test the DNA evidence further. And she ran it against anyone with a criminal record. And in 2008, they got a match. The DNA that was found at the murder scene matched Donald Bess. He was a convicted rapist and was already serving 25 years in prison for that crime. At the time of Angela's death, he was out on parole, and it would turn out that he was quite a serial rapist, and he had lots and lots of victims. In 2010, the case went to trial. Sheila drove miles and miles to be there, of course. So did Angela's family and her sorority sisters and other friends. And this monster had the nerve to plead not guilty in this case. Police basically believe that perhaps he had been let into her apartments when he said there was some sort of an emergency, or Angela was trying to help him, something to that effect. And when things started to go wrong or weird, she tried to call her boyfriend but was stopped and then attacked, is their basic time frame. They can't, of course, be sure of that because he didn't admit to anything. He pleaded not guilty on this case, even though his DNA was everywhere.
Angie was the type, not only would she help someone, she would open the door, and if they needed something, she would do it.
During this trial, several witnesses came forward with their own experiences with this Donald Bess character, that he had raped them, abused them, all of these sorts of horrible things, including his ex-wife, and she claimed that he was abusive to her and their child. So the trial ended and he was found guilty. Because he was already serving 25 years for a different crime, he was actually given the death sentence, and his execution date has not been put out yet. He's still on death row. He's still on the website and all of that jazz. He has tried to appeal the court's decision because he claims that this is too harsh a punishment. Too harsh a punishment for murdering and raping an innocent woman. Today, Sheila is still a private investigator. She didn't think that she would stick with it, but she actually received a lot of letters from other families that were in similar situations or cases that were unsolved and so on, so she did stick with it. It's pretty an amazing story. You know, her persistence and bugging and getting into this whole case really made them solve this case. She got on them with the DNA, they tested it, and they found the match. It's really thanks to her that Angela's case was solved. It's a very tragic story, but it's really a huge thanks to Sheila that this case got solved.
When Donald Bess was convicted, there was absolutely no closure. She's still dead. I mean, the people that talk about closure, they've really never been through something like that. So the fact that people are like, don't you feel better? Don't you Don't you feel some accomplishment? No, she's still dead.
Alright, lovelies, thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.